Hi, my name is Carlet. Welcome to Tozen Daigaku, Corona and Labor Law. Today, after my lecture, we will have a Q&A where you can type in your questions, and I'll try to field those questions. Also, later on, we will be putting Japanese subtitles onto the video after we upload it. So if you have friends or family who read Japanese, that will be available to you. Okay, my name, as I said, is Carlet. I am the senior organizer at Tozen Union. It's Zenkoku Ippan Tokyo Zeneral Union. We are celebrating our 10th anniversary since founding this month. Actually, celebration is not the right word, of course, because of the terrible crisis that we face now in Japan and around the world. Today, I want to talk about how labor law applies to Corona issues. And when I say Corona issues, I mean issues that we're seeing come up among workers in Japan. And I will explain what issues we're getting. We're getting inquiries from both members and non-members, and how labor law applies to those issues. Okay, the Nikkei reported today that there were 577 new cases in Japan yesterday, with total cases of COVID-19 reaching 10,277 as of 10 p.m., with infections in all but one of Japan's 47 prefectures. 15 died yesterday, pushing Corona deaths to 222. Now, at Tozen Union, we've been getting inquiries basically from morning to night, both, I should say, by email, by phone, by Facebook Messenger, and also our Corona hotline, which is a direct phone line. And I'd like to explain some of those inquiries, what they are and what people are facing now in Japan. Of course, the main problem we're seeing a lot, of course, is job loss. People getting fired or non-renewed, or even if they're not directly fired, they're getting their work taken away and then losing all their income. So, of course, this is a very serious situation, because those who lose their job have difficulty during this crisis of getting a new job, since almost nobody is hiring right now, particularly in the industries that we at Tozen Union represent, such as teaching-related, language-related, publishing, banking, and factories. Of course, we strongly urge that people work from home if they can. If you're in a non-essential industry, the best thing, of course, is to work from home or stay at home, because every resource we have in society must be used to contain the virus and speed up the time that we can finally get back to a semblance of a normal life. So for most workers who are not essential, that means staying at home or working at home. So one of the problems we're seeing is that some employers do have their workers stay home. However, they either don't pay them a reduced amount, or are forcing them to use up their paid holiday allotment. In Japan, if you work 6 months or more at an employer, you get 10 days of paid leave that you can take freely. And then each year, your new allotment is slightly bigger until you max out at 20 days of paid leave. Okay, now before we discuss anything about paid leave or what they should pay you while you stay at home, it's important to distinguish between different types of employment contract. So the best contract is full-time with a monthly guarantee, like monthly pay. Whether or not the company gives you work or whether they have work to give you, they pay you a set amount each month. And in effect, you're guaranteed that pay as long as you come to work. This contrasts with an hourly pay contract. These are also called 0-hour contracts. And they're called that because you get paid for the hours that you actually work, but there's no guarantee of any pay at all. So you might get, let's say, 2,000 yen an hour. And if you don't work at all during that month, then you don't get anything. If you work a little bit, you get a little bit, etc. So that's very unstable, because if work goes away, your income goes with it. So another distinction among contracts that it's important to make is whether your contract is open-ended or fixed term. Now, for the workers, open-ended contract is better. That's the standard, traditional, permanent contract in Japan. Now, when I say permanent, it's technically open-ended, but it's permanent in the sense that the employer cannot fire the employee without a damn good reason. It doesn't mean that the worker is tied to the employer, of course. It's not modern slavery. The worker can resign whenever she wants, and so it's a type of job security from the worker's perspective. The other type of contract is called a fixed-term contract. Many in Japan are on one-year contracts, and then each year they get renewed. So you might be start with a one-year contract and work 5 or 6 years, but you're still on this one-year contract. Now, this, of course, is far less stable, because at the end of the contract, you don't know whether your employer is going to decide to renew your contract or just say, okay, that's it, goodbye. So this is a very precarious position to be in. And of course, at Tozen Union, we fight very often to get the open-ended, more permanent, more stable contract. Now, one good thing about the fixed-term contract is that in labor contract law, there's a provision, Article 18, that allows the worker to make him or herself permanent after 5 years of continuous employment. Okay, now one final distinction that's important to make is your contract an employment contract, which is covered by all labor laws, or is it an independent contract, what's called gyomu itaku? This is also called outsourcing. In effect, the company is saying that you're another business, and it's a business-to-business relationship, and therefore labor laws don't apply. So these are the distinctions you have to make before we even consider what your current status is and how to go about dealing with the issues that come up. Okay. So if your employer says to stay home because of Corona, and many, if not most, employers are already doing this, Article 26 of Labor Standards Act should apply at the very least. Now, Article 26 says that the employer must pay you 60% of your average salary when the employer is responsible for the furlough or the leave. Now, many employers think, well, the coronavirus pandemic, I'm not responsible for that, so why should I have to pay the 6% at all? This is a natural disaster, etc. However, the term employer responsibility is broadly defined. And I would say a better way to think about it, although the law says clearly when the employer is responsible, a better way to think about it is when the worker is not responsible. So, of course, the worker is also not responsible for the pandemic. So it's generally accepted today by most legal authorities that 60% in Article 26 does apply. Now, this is called kyugyo teate. I've been translating it as furlough allowance. So at the very minimum, you should be getting 60% of your average pay. Now, the way average pay is defined and calculated is a little tricky. So let's say they sent you home April 1st, let's say for the whole month, just to keep it simple. So to calculate what your average pay is, you go to the 3 previous months. So that's January, February, March, and you add up the entire salary of those 3 months, okay? And then you divide it by 91 days. Now, why 91 days? That's because that's how many days were in January, February, March of this year. So you notice that they're dividing it by the calendar days, and this is this comes out to a lower figure than if they divided it by the day's work. So this is disadvantageous to the worker. Now, what the law says is when they pay the 60% of average pay, it's 60% of that average pay based on the calendar days. Okay, so they also have the option to pay the rate that 60% of the rate that they would have paid if you had worked. And of course, that's based on dividing your total pay by the number of days worked. Okay, now, if you work very few days a month, then your average pay is going to be much lower than what I call your real pay based on the days worked. However, there's a guarantee that it can't go below 60%. Okay, this is Article 12 of Labor Standards Law. Now, this is causing a lot of confusion because there are two different 60%. Article 12 of Labor Standards Act tells you how to calculate your average pay. And it can be no lower than the 60% of what your real pay is. And again, real pay means, in my opinion, what you would have paid, it means dividing your total pay by the number of days worked. Okay, so the average pay cannot go below 60% of that. And then Article 26 says for the kyugyo teate, or the furlough allowance, they must pay at least 60% of that. So in really malicious employers are using these little loopholes to say, okay, well, if the worker doesn't work that many days a month, the average pay, I can calculate it as low as 60% of their real pay. And then the furlough allowance only has to be 6% of that. So they're coming up with a 36% figure, 36% of your real pay. Now, of course, this is a really bad example of really horrible employers. And we are fighting against the few cases we find what are called black corporations, black companies in Japan. However, what we are urging employers to do is pay 100%. Okay, and if employers don't pay 100%, what's happening is that they're risking not only the health of their employees, but the public health. And the reason is because by not paying the full amount, many families are finding it really hard to make ends meet during this crisis. And like I said, there's very little new work to find. So they're kind of forcing themselves to go to work. They're pushing employers to let them work despite the risk. So it's really important that they pay the full amount for employees to stay at home or work at home as a way to protect society and fight the virus. Now, the Ministry of Health, Labor, Welfare has been recommending teleworking and also urges employers to discuss fully with their workforce what they're doing, how they're going to do it, and urging them to pay 100% of their normal wage. And so we think that's very important and a good sign that the ministry is at least saying that. There's no teeth. It's not a law. However, it's good at least that they're recommending that. The Labor Lawyers Association of Japan, Nihon Rodo Bengodan, also says that employers should pay 100%. And again, this is basically fight the virus pay. Employers should pay their workers to stay at home. If they can telework, fine. But even if they can't, they should pay workers to stay at home as a way to protect public health. Okay, now, as far as paid holidays, in general, workers can choose when to take their paid holidays. So the employer cannot just force you to take your paid holidays early because of the coronavirus. Now, the only time that they can is if they sign a special agreement with a representative of a majority of the workers at the workplace. Other than that, you can take your full allotment freely when you want and for the reason you want. So that's something also that we really need to resist. employers trying to somehow reduce the losses. I mean, understandable, of course. What they're doing is trying to force you to take paid holidays now, so then later you won't be able to take them, and they'll get a full, they'll get you to work completely as normal afterwards. Okay. Now, in the essential industries, of course, healthcare, sanitation workers, food-related workers like grocery store workers, food distribution, of course, farmers. In all these essential jobs, it's really important that employers pay some kind of hazard pay, for instance, 50% above the normal pay or time and a half. And so we would definitely urge employers to do that because, of course, there is a greater risk if you have to go to work every day. In Japan, the risk is even greater because you have to ride trains that are still crowded despite the declared state of emergency throughout the country. So that's something to consider. Now, foreigners in Japan are in a particularly vulnerable situation because the types of jobs they can do is already limited. There are language barriers, cultural barriers, and also visa issues. So many foreigners in Japan depend on their employer to some degree for the visas. Now, there's not a system of sponsorship. Employers don't technically sponsor the visas. However, if your visa is coming up for renewal and you have to extend it, you have to apply for an extension, you have to be employed or it's very difficult to get an extension of that visa. Also, in the middle of this pandemic, it's very difficult to go to the immigration offices. So what immigration in Japan has done is they've said, okay, if your visa expires in March, April, May, or June, normally you'd have to apply for the extension or change of visa before your visa expires, of course. However, the Immigration Bureau has said they will extend those applications by 3 months. So if your visa is about to expire, let's say April 30th, then it's automatically extended to July 30th. So you have 3 more months to apply for that visa. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic by that time, but that gives you a little extra time to, prepare and deal with that issue. Okay, so another thing that so many foreigners find themselves out of work or with reduced income, visa issues like I just described, and also if they lose a visa, they can't really go home. This is not a time that they can just take a plane home, so they're in a very uncomfortable and difficult position. However, one good thing is that the government recently decided to pay adults around Japan 100,000 yen, and it looks like anyone with a Juminhyo or residency card will be eligible for that 100,000 yen. Now that means it will include foreigners as long as they're documented, as long as they're here legally. Okay, so I think that's kind of a basic wrap up of many of the labor related issues. A lot of employees are seeing that another thing that happened with this pandemic is that it really got very serious in March and April, of course, as you know. Many people saw that their contracts were about to be renewed, but before they were actually renewed, the stay-at-home order came, and right now they're in a state of limbo, like incredible insecurity because new contracts have not been signed, and yet, of course, they have to keep, living, and suddenly their income is gone. They don't know whether or not they're going to have a job, and if they do, when it'll happen, what will be the situation, and so that's also causing very serious problems. This is a problem that we see with many ALTs, assistant language teachers, around the country. because different school boards are having their schools open or closed. And even when they're closed, they're having some ALTs come to work despite the danger, whereas others, they're not signing up new ALT contracts. And so ALTs have no idea what's going to happen. And right now, they're just in that state of not knowing, in very precarious, insecure position. Okay, so I'm going to take a little break and then I'll finish up. I'm going to take a break of, let's say, 5 minutes, and then I'll come back. Okay, so. Okay, I'm back. So what are some of the things you can do if you're out of work? If you're truly out of work? Okay, of course, we're a labor union, so contact Tozen Union is one thing you can do, and we can give you advice and we can help you organize your workplace into a functioning union. These days, of course, there's the added challenge that meetings have to be online, either by Zoom or Skype or some other platform. So that's the first thing. Definitely join a union, build a union, and you're a lot stronger if you work collectively with your fellow employees. Now, some of the other specific things are, if you're completely out of work, if you've lost your job, you can collect unemployment benefits. Now, unemployment benefits, first of all, you have to have been enrolled in at least 12 of the last 24 months to be eligible. So that's the unemployment benefits. You have to go to Hello Work. Now, I'm not sure how things are going. A lot of government offices are still functioning, and you would have to go and apply for the unemployment benefits. Now, if they have they may be devising some system where you don't have to go as often. Normally, you have to go once a month in order to get the help, and it's a percentage of your normal salary. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is, if you're sick, first of all, if you're sick with coronavirus, of course, you have to stay home and or be hospitalized. If you're sick with coronavirus, and if you were enrolled in Shakai Hoken, you can get wage coverage. Now, what this is Shakai Hoken is basically Japan's national health and pension system. And they're all in one set called Shakai Hoken, which directly translated means social insurance. And if you're enrolled in that, and not everybody is, if you're enrolled in that and you become sick, after the third day, you can start getting a large portion of your salary from the system, not from the employer, but from the system. So that's something that you should find out. Were you enrolled or are you enrolled in Shakai Hoken? That's definitely something you should definitely look into. Like I said, there's the government assistance that should be coming. That's 100,000 yen to official residents of Japan. And you should both look at that. Now, as a union, Tozen Union, of course, as I said, we are demanding that employers pay 100% for the workers to stay at home. This is non-essential workers, non-essential industries. And of course, everyone's job is very important, and we all think that our jobs are essential. I'm a labor organizer, but when it comes to this virus, my job is not essential work. So, of course, by essential, we mean health workers, food-related workers, those in industries that are absolutely necessary for the distribution of food and medical supplies, sanitation, all those things that are the very foundation of our society. Now, even if you're in a non-essential industry, of course, working from home, if that's possible, and it's not possible for all workers, but if it is possible, of course, we encourage that. And we insist that whether you work from home or just stay at home, employers must pay you your full salary. Now, we are demanding this from companies and all employers. Now, I know a lot of businesses, especially small businesses, are having serious trouble because the way our system works, companies are not really encouraged to set aside a lot of reserves in case something happens. So they're really being hit hard. Revenues crashing, yet they're still having to pay, and we're demanding that they pay full salaries to their workers, or even time and a half if they're in essential industries where they have to go to work. So what does a small business do? Well, we definitely encourage the government to provide support to small businesses to be able to pay their workers, to be able to keep functioning as a business. Now, the issue here is that in Japan and in many countries, other countries like the US, all of the assistance is coming, or not all, but most of it is coming top down. Government is providing all this money to big companies, and the idea is that then they will be able to help small companies, and then the small companies will be able to pay their workers. It's basically the trickle-down theory applied to the coronavirus pandemic. Our position, of course, is the other way around. Whatever assistance happens should go from the bottom up. Companies should pay their workers to stay at home or pay hazard pay to those who must go to work. The big businesses should keep their contracts with subcontractors, and the government should provide support for employers specifically to be able to continue to pay their employees properly. So the assistance must go bottom up, not top down. Employers having their workers stay at home, work at home is their social responsibility. Everything in our society must be geared and dedicated to ending this pandemic as soon as possible and with as few casualties as possible. It is not what's called Japanese majime. It's not majime, or it's not admirable dedication for workers to get on crowded trains and come to work even when their work is not essential. So it's very important that employers and employees both see that it is social responsibility to do social distancing, to stay at home, work at home. And that if employers in non-essential industries, if they are making you work, they are helping the virus. They're helping the spread of the virus. I think we all know the professor who has said that we have to reduce social contacts by at least 80% in order to bend the curve down very quickly within a matter of weeks. And 80% is a lot. And it's clear that that's not yet happening in Japan. And if it's below 80%, like 65%, we're going to see a very prolonged pandemic. At the end of the day, it's very important that we prioritize public health as well as individual health. Please prioritize your health. And if you're an employer, make sure, if you're an employer in a non-essential industry, please make sure your workers get paid full to either stay at home or work from home. Thank you very much. So now we will take any questions that you have, if there are any questions. So I'll ask my assistant if there are any questions coming out.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to read now. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay.
And just so you know, Mizuho, who's helping me with this live stream, is not here in the office. We are definitely working from home. Okay. Go ahead, Mizuho. I can't hear you now.
months. So, okay, the first question is, do you have any suggestions on how to break down the shogunai attitude that Japanese workers have about their working conditions, which makes them less likely to join a union? I.e., how can the cultural gap be crossed?
Okay, so the question is, do you have any suggestions about how to break down the shogunai attitude of that makes Japanese reluctant to join the unions, and how to break down the cultural gap? Okay, so yeah, sure, there are cultural differences. I don't know if it's true that like I grew up in the United States, and I don't know if it's true that Japanese join unions less than Americans. In fact, the union density rate is higher in Japan than in the U.S. It is true that there's definitely a shogunai attitude among Japanese workers regarding their working conditions. And it seems to me, first of all, it's very important that we as foreigners understand the situation that Japanese workers are in. The entire culture is built around the corporation. The entire culture is built around the idea that there's a very strong work ethic. Working long and hard is seen as, like I used the word before, majime. It's considered very earnest. And I should say also, shogunai, for our listeners who don't speak Japanese, means kind of like a c'est la vie attitude, or an attitude of, well, there's nothing to be done about it. And so kind of a complacency, I guess, is a good word. I would say, first of all, know the situation, listen very well. This is not something I always practice myself, but of course, I think it's very important to listen and to really understand the situation. And I think also it's important to understand that it's very difficult for Japanese workers, in my experience, for Japanese workers individually to suddenly join a union when their coworkers have not joined a union. It's drawing a lot of attention to them. Most employers in Japan, and maybe elsewhere, are kind of shocked when there's a labor union comes to their workplace, and there's a lot of fear on the side of companies that all of a sudden they have all this new work and they're going to be attacked and it's going to be a pain in the neck, and it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then they attack the union and then it gets into a big fight. And Tozen Union, we experience this all the time. So I think it's important that you understand that it's probably better to have meetings with many employees at the same time. It's got to be something that's really organic, and that all the employees, or most of the employees, work together. If it's just one person standing up, and if that one person doesn't get along with his or her colleagues, then I'm sure everyone knows the expression that the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. And I don't really like that expression, but I know it is kind of true in Japanese society a lot. So it's very important that you don't pressure, and that try to cultivate, try to listen, and also cultivate a sense among many employees, and try to have meetings with many employees at the place. It's a lot to ask for a Japanese worker at a company that doesn't have a union to suddenly join a union and start fighting their employer. So, and I think that might be true for other countries as well. I find it very difficult to recruit Westerners as much as it is to recruit Japanese. So that's how I would answer. Okay, back to you, Mizuho.
Okay, I'm going to read in Japanese, so could you interpret in English?
Okay, go slowly. So, yeah.
私は障害者入所施設を運営する社会福祉法人で管理職として働いています。
Okay, so I'm a middle manager at a facility for people with disabilities. Is that correct?
Yeah. And 18名の職員のシフトを組んでいますが。
Wait, I'm sorry. 18名?
18人。
Okay.
の職員のシフトを組んでいますが、3名の職員からコロナが怖いのでしばらく仕事を休みたいと 行ってきました。
Okay. So I oversee 18 employees at the facility, and three of those staffers said that they're not going to come to work because of fears of virus.
でも3人が休むと残りの職員の負担が非常に大きくなります。
So if the three stay home, however, the 15 are burdened with all this extra work.
私も往復3時間電車に乗って通勤するのが怖いですが、責任ある立場上働き続けています。何かアドバイスがあれば教えていただければ幸いです。
Okay, so I also travel 3 hours a day round trip for my commute. And of course, I'm afraid of it, but as a person of responsibility, I have to do this. So if you have any advice, I'd like to ask you. Okay, this is a question that I wasn't expecting, and this is a very serious question. And first of all, I would say that if you're in a facility with disabled, I would say that, first of all, you are an essential worker in an essential industry. I don't see how it's possible to run the facility if no one's there. And I certainly understand your concerns. And I don't have any good advice. Like, I would have to think about it. I mean, one thing, of course, is that in any case, you should definitely be getting hazard pay for your work. And I would say, of course, you should wear as much protective gear as possible. Of course, I mean, these are the things you're hearing all the time. Of course, wash your hands with soap very carefully. Wear gloves and masks and protective gears when you're on the train and when you get there. As soon as you get to work, wash your hands. I mean, I'm not a medical professional, of course. I'm just relaying what you probably already know. I would say be very, very careful and make sure that you're very careful with your employees. Make sure they practice social distancing. And if there's any way to maybe stagger the schedule so they don't have to ride rush hour trains, that'll be good not only for them, but also for others. So staggering work schedules, if that's possible. I don't know the situation you're in. If that's possible, I would definitely recommend that. So I'm not sure if you speak English or not. So should I say it in Japanese or? You're going to put subtitles, right?
Subtitles,
yeah. I'm sorry I can't offer any more advice than that. A lot of it's just kind of things you're hearing from medical professionals. But the only thing I guess I could suggest is that stagger the work schedules as much as possible to avoid the rush hours, because rush hour obviously poses greater risk than other times.
So next question is, is it okay? Next question?
Yes.
Is there a way to ask the government to give individual companies guidance on visas? My company says they can't grant me an additional 3 months for my visa extension because they have gotten conflicting information from the government.
Okay, one thing that's important to understand is that the employer does not sponsor your visa. If you're an employee on some kind of work visa, and there's many different types, it's not your employer who sponsors the visa. It's self-sponsored. So the 3-month extension is from the Immigration Bureau. It's from the government. Your employer cannot extend it or not extend it. You still have the visa. So I'm not exactly sure what your employer is saying. It may be that the employer is trying to let you go or something like that. I'm not sure. But it's definitely not up to the employer to extend your visa or not. The 3 months, it's Immigration Bureau policy that you will have 3 more months to apply for an extension, which means during those 3 months, you will still have the same visa you have now. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, the next one. Sorry, BB, I missed your question. Now I'm going to.
Okay, this is BB?
Yeah.
Okay.
What should we be aware of in regards to getting sick and possible hospitalization while working from home and work time support pay?
I'm sorry, could you say what should be aware of? Oh, in terms of pay?
What should we be aware of in regard to getting sick and possible hospitalization while working from home and work time?
Oh, okay. So the question is, what should we be aware of if we get sick or possibly hospitalized while working at home? And then what was the second part?
What second part?
Oh, about the after working at home, about work time
home and work time support pay.
Okay, work time support pay. Okay, so I mentioned it during the lecture about the Shakai Hoken system. Now, if you're in Shakai Hoken, you can apply for what's the wage coverage, which is called Shobyo Teate. It's basically sick, injured allowance. So if you get coronavirus, whether you work at home or not, first of all, you should apply for Shobyo Teate if you are in Shakai Hoken. Now, if you're not in Shakai Hoken, then you're not eligible for that work coverage. But if you're at home. So basically, in a normal situation, you wouldn't get paid during the time that you're out due to sickness unless your company was responsible for it or if it happened at the workplace. However, in this situation, I would say it's important that we demand 100% while you're out or while you're in the hospital. Now, if you don't have Shakai Hoken, as far as medical costs, you should be in Kokumin Kenko Hoken. And I think it's very important that everyone is in Kokumin Kenko Hoken. The Kokumin Kenko Hoken is a system of healthcare. It's the public healthcare system for non-employees or part-time employees. So make sure before you get sick that you go to the yakusho and ask for Kokumin, say that you want to get into the Kokumin Kenko Hoken system. That's something you have to pay every month, but it covers 70% of your medical costs. It's also true with Shakai Hoken. The Shakai Hoken is more for full-time employees. The Kokumin Kenko Hoken is, like I said, for part-time employees, and you have to be in the system. And then if you get sick, you'll show your card. It's like a little card called Hokensho. And then you can get at least 70% coverage of your medical costs. However, you won't get wage coverage. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, so the next question is from me.
Okay, number 5. Okay.
日本語で言います。
Mizuhoね。Okay.
なんか結構いろんな会社がその労働組合と戦っている会社が今実際コロナの影響で実際に会って断行することっていうのはもちろん難しいと思うので、いろんな支部とか労働組合がオンラインで Zoom とか Skype とかオンラインでの断行をしようとしてるけど、そのオンラインでの断行を拒否っていうかオンラインではできないっていう会社が結構あると思うんですね。で、それは断行拒否に当たるか、もしくは実際に会えるまで断行しませんっていうのは断行拒否に当たるかどうかってすごい気になってます。
Okay, so Mizuho's question. Mizuho is a labor organizer. She was saying how, of course, many companies are fighting over this with labor unions. And of course, we have been trying to have collective bargaining. And many of our locals are requesting collective bargaining online with management. Of course, since now it's impossible to have collective bargaining sessions in person, she's been asking for collective bargaining with many different employers, and many of them are refusing and saying that we don't know how to do online collective bargaining. So first of all, does that constitute refusal to bargain collectively, which is illegal under the Trade Union Act? Okay, so this collective bargaining online it's not completely new. There have been such collective bargaining sessions even before this pandemic, but now, of course, it's much, much more common, and it's kind of a new issue. When the Trade Union Act was created back in the 1940s and 50s, of course, there was no such thing as online collective bargaining or online anything. So this is something that the law did not anticipate. So I would say one thing to consider is, okay, so like I said, it's illegal under Article 7 of the Trade Union Act to refuse to do collective bargaining without a good reason. That's what Article 7 says. And the question is, well, what is a good reason? So when courts would decide what is a good reason, they basically look at one major concept, which is throughout Japanese law, is it goriteki or not? The goriteki means reasonable or logical, rational. So is it goriteki? Is it reasonable, logical, rational for a company to say, oh, we can't do online CBs, we don't know how to do it? So I would say we could definitely argue that any company today knows how to do, let's say, Skype or Zoom or some other platform, how to communicate. In fact, many companies who are doing telework and working from home are using a lot of these platforms. In fact, universities throughout Japan are using them, particularly Zoom. Teachers are actually teaching their classes online using Zoom. So I would say, first of all, we can definitely argue that refusing to do collective bargaining, what we call CB, because they don't know how to do online conferencing, is implausible and not goriteki. It's not reasonable or logical. So that's what I would first argue. Now, of course, one of the dangers we anticipate is that once we start doing online collective bargaining all the time, employers are going to insist on that even long after the pandemic is over. So that's something to keep in mind. But again, whether the refusal is legitimate or not depends on what is rational and reasonable. Hope that answers your question.
Oh yeah. One more question.
Okay. Is this from you or someone online?
No, Jerome.
Okay, this is number 6. Okay, Jerome.
You've talked to a lot of people over the past month.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine you're getting your fair share of people experiencing not just labor-related stress, but also just stress associated with living in the time of Corona. What advice do you have for people to keep themselves sane through all of this?
Okay, so the question from Jerome is, you've talked a lot over the past month, you've spoken with many people about not just labor-related issues, but also the stress of living in the time of Corona, and what advice would you have for them? I don't know if this is a labor issue. I can only give you my personal advice, but as a unionist, of course, I think the advice is very similar to advice I'd give in normal times, is that, human contact and human relationships are very important. One of the reasons people like being in unions is that sense of solidarity, of mutual aid, of mutual support, providing comfort and compassion to each other, communicating. I think one of the dangers of staying at home and being quarantined and living under quarantine is that you feel isolated, not just physically, but also emotionally. So it's very important that in any way that you can continue contacts with other human beings, including online meetings and Zoom and stuff like that, it's important to pursue that and to maintain human connections as much as possible. Personally, I feel most, depressed about the whole pandemic when I'm all by myself at home, or or in the office, which is near my home. So I think Yeah, and by the way, I'm in the office. It's right next to my home, and no one else comes here, so I don't want people to think I'm a big hypocrite for actually coming to work. But it's literally 10 meters from my home, and nobody else is ever here. So anyway, so like I said, I would say that it's very important. I feel much better when I'm talking to other people, and I think a lot of people do. So definitely maintain as much human contact as possible.
Yeah, that's it.
That's good. Okay, great. Okay, so our next Tozen Daigaku is. Do you have an idea? Do you remember? I think it's in May, right? We might have to do another one in April, but
May 17th.
May 17th. Okay. And also, if you have questions, please contact us at Tozen Union. You can contact. Well, first of all, our website has contact information. It's tokyogeneralunion.org. Please contact us and ask any questions you'd like, especially related to labor in the time of Corona. So thank you very much.
Wait.
What? I'm sorry.
One more question.
One more question. Number 7. What?
What's the Corona hotline number from Jerome?
What's the Corona hotline number? Okay. That number is, I'm typing it in as I speak because I personally remember. Wait a minute, hold a second. I think it's 050. Let's see. Okay. Let's see, where is it? 050-5532-4405. That's the Tozen Corona hotline for labor issues. So please check it out. And I'm getting chats here. So anyway, okay. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Next month. When is the next Tozen Daigaku?
17th
of May at 2 p.m.
Yep.
Yeah, May 17th. And what's this topic as of now?
Hold on.
Sorry.
Shakai Hoken.
Okay, so it may be very relevant. The topic for next time on May 17th at 2 p.m. will be Shakai Hoken, Japan's public system of health and pension. Now, if something happens between now and then related to Corona, we may adapt it slightly to deal more with Corona. But other than that, please come back around then and check out our website, and hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.
Okay.